Welcome to the stage, Assistant Professor of Professional Practice and IGP-affiliated faculty member, Camille Francois.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, that's rough. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to this conversation today. I know it's cold outside and we're gathering to discuss a topic that can feel a little bit of a downer. We're talking about how many women in public life over the course of the many years are continued to be the target of technology-facilitated online violence. And it's a privilege to be able to host the release of this report, which we're going to discuss today. And we admit that it feels that the moment of the release is almost too on the nose with the news that we're all reading. As you all know, the latest episode of people turning their attention to this grave crisis is one in which a viral AI tool, this time through Grok, is the latest vector for generating non-consensual intimate imagery of women. So the speed with which these capabilities proliferate, and frankly the casualness with which they're deployed, and the shrug that often follows from the companies responsible can feel like a grim pattern. But, and this is what the report makes clear and is optimistic, we are in some way at an inflection point. At IGP, we have been working on this issue since the founding of the Institute. It's true that sometimes finding hope can be a little bit of a discipline when you consider these things, but we do, and last year we released a report called It's Everyone's Problem, demonstrating that there are pathways to respond to this crisis: legal pathways, technical pathways, institutional pathways. We've also engaged with people who have been on the front line of documenting how these attacks unfold, like investigative journalists, for instance, who are showing which are these tools that are most at risk of deploying these harms and how they are weaponized. And so, in short, the work of building the defenses is absolutely happening, and it's happening by many people that are in this very room. And so, no one in this field has done more to ensure that this work of building the defenses is grounded in real evidence than Dr. Posetti, who is with us today. The persistence of these bad actors and their relentless creativity to finding new ways to harm women in public is only outmatched by Dr. Possetti's persistence in documenting it with utmost rigor and in building the evidentiary foundation that our field really needs. It's a genuine honor to welcome her to the stage, along with our fantastic panel, to discuss this important research today. Julie, the floor is yours.
Welcome to the stage, Director of the Information Integrity Initiative at TheNerve, Julie Posetti.
Thank you for that incredibly encouraging introduction, despite the fact that you're relatively voiceless. You do give voice to these issues very powerfully. So thank you, Camille. So I'm here today to discuss the report that we have published as commissioned by UN Women. It is the product of collaborative research by colleagues who I'll mention as the presentation goes on. But just to start, online violence is an escalating threat to women's participation in public life and in democratic deliberation in the AI age, especially in the context of rising authoritarianism and the increased repression of women's rights organisations and networked misogyny. It's designed to stymie women's freedom of expression, and it's part of a burgeoning strategy to roll back women's hard-won right to gender equality and empowerment. So today we'll be sharing new data from our UN Women commissioned survey of women in the public sphere, which is focused on women human rights defenders, activists, and journalists. It demonstrates the scale of the problem and the function of artificial intelligence technologies now in its manifestations. So as our data shows, we have reached the tipping point. There's an alarming trend in the trajectory of online violence to offline attacks, abuse, and harassment, proving that there really is nothing virtual about online violence. Online violence is also known as technology-facilitated violence against women. And it's an act that is committed, assisted, or aggravated and amplified by the use of communications technologies and other digital tools, which result in, or is likely to result in, physical, sexual, psychological, social, political, or economic harm, or other infringements of rights and freedoms. These are forms of violence directed against women because they are women and that affect women disproportionately. It's also about silencing and chilling the agency that women in public life in particular have. The manifestations include harassment, abuse, targeted surveillance, image and video-based abuse, doxing, swatting, gendered hate speech, gendered disinformation, and threats which are delivered via information communications technologies such as social media platforms and chat apps and generative AI tools and text messages and even email. The latest manifestation of this violence is generative AI apps that not just nudify women and girls instantaneously without their consent, but simulate them being sexually assaulted. AI-assisted rape is now literally at the fingertips of perpetrators. So I just want to put this latest research into context briefly. In 2019, my team and I were commissioned by UNESCO, which is the UN agency focused on the safety of journalists and freedom of expression in this space. And we produced a study published iteratively between 2019 and 2022, which involved a survey of over 700 women journalists and interviews with over 180 international journalists and experts, 15 in-depth country case studies, and 2 pioneering big data case studies, which involved an analysis of over 2 million social media posts. The 2 women in focus for that research were Maria Ressa, who is a close colleague and of course here as a professor at CEPA, and Carol Cadwallader, the British investigative journalist. And UN Women's decision was to try to gather additional data 5 years later, including with reference to women human rights defenders and activists, as well as journalists. So we are now analysing data from a survey of 640 women respondents from 119 countries. And this was conducted in Arabic, English, French, Portuguese, and Spanish. And what we found is really alarming. We found that around 70% of all of the women we surveyed had experienced online violence in the course of their work. For women journalists and media workers, we see that figure sits at 75%. And the reason I'm singling out that group is because we have data from 2020, from the survey that was conducted at the end of 2020, exactly 5 years before we conducted this current survey, which indicated that the exposure rate of women journalists to online violence was at around 73%. So we have now officially reached the 3/4 level of exposure for women journalists. Also, incredibly disturbing is the trajectory of online violence to offline harm, where we see targeted attacks on women journalists, women human rights defenders, women activists, spilling or tipping into the physical realm, manifesting themselves as harassment, abuse, and attacks in physical spaces and with physical and psychological and legal impacts. So we see that when it comes to writers and other public communicators, including, for example, the people known as influencers or content creators, 45% say they have experienced online violence which has spilled into offline contexts. For journalists and media workers, that figure stands at 42%. And that is extremely dangerous because what we know is that the silencing of journalists in particular, but also human rights defenders and activists, is a tactic of authoritarianism and fascism. And online violence is also a feature of crimes against women journalists. And if we look at this data comparing 2020 with 2025, we see that women journalists are experiencing offline harm connected to online violence at more than twice the rate they experienced in 2020. So 42% of our respondents who were women journalists said they had experienced these physical realm manifestations of online violence. And this is a feature, this threat of physical harm associated with online violence, of impunity cases involving women journalists. So we know in the case of the Maltese investigative journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia, for example, who was assassinated in connection with her investigative reporting. In the public inquiry in her case, they connected the online violence she experienced, targeting her, even though she herself was not on social media platforms. She was threatened, she was abused, she was harassed, she was humiliated with what we used to refer to as cheap fakes, for example. And they connected this experience to her murder with partial impunity. And we've identified a new mode of online violence involving such impunity cases, where women journalists are being threatened with reference to these cases in Malta, in India, in the UK, and in Qatar, among other places. They're threatened with imagery associated with the murder of journalists with impunity, and comments like, "You're next," for example. So the mainstreaming of generative AI tools following the release of ChatGPT-3 in late 2022 has really supercharged the risks associated with online violence that are experienced by women in public life. And this is because it had suddenly become much easier and cheaper to produce much more believable abusive content, such as deepfake videos simulating rape, for example, which could be distributed much more quickly by algorithms tuned to amplify hate, anger, and division to maximise big tech companies' profits. And OpenAI's LLM began ingesting hardcore porn content in December last year, turning ChatGPT into an auto-generating porn hub, if you like. Since then, the nudification and image-based sexual violence has been further normalised by Elon Musk's Grok, which has reportedly generated over 3 million nudified images, with 6,700 produced per hour at one point. This tech is seamlessly embedded into Musk's social platform X, meaning that the tool can automatically post synthetic intimate content directly into the public timelines, effectively shortening the abuse pipeline and minimising the technical friction between image creation and distribution, and also amplification. And so the data from our UN Women report shows that around a quarter, up to 28%, 30% of women in public life have experienced AI-assisted technologies. For women journalists, that figure is at around 19.5%. For human rights defenders and activists, just above 28%. And for writers and other public communicators, 30%. So heading towards a third of some women in public life. I think it's important to acknowledge my co-author and close colleague, Kaylee Williams, who's in the room, who is a PhD student also here at Columbia. And she recently had a journal article published in an academic journal called Violence Against Women, which found that these apps we're talking about have very visceral features that allow not for just nudification and fetishization, but brutalization and humiliation as well. There's a paper doll-like video game interface here, encouraging users to pose and dress women in a variety of ways. They allow you to change the body parts and the size of those body parts. Make a pregnant belly, make the breasts bigger, for example. And many of these video-enabled tools now allow you to generate entire sex videos that include rape fantasies. In fact, just last week, a British MP campaigning for a ban on nudification tools and apps said that an ex-user had posted an AI video of her being, quote, chloroformed and prepared for rape. And this is a woman who was seeking accountability and the regulation of big tech platforms. So just a reminder that this is about profit as much as it is about misogyny, sexism, and discrimination. The Tech Transparency Project, in fact, identified over 100 apps on Google and Apple's app stores that enable nudification and synthetic rape. According to CNBC reporting, these apps have over 700 million downloads worldwide and have generated $117 million in revenue so far. Another outlet, The Indicator, found that Meta platforms host over 4,000 paid ads for AI nudifiers just between early December and last year and mid-January this year, despite the fact they said they were taking action against these. And when the UK regulator threatened action, along with the Prime Minister, against X and Grok, Musk turned it into a monetisation opportunity. He said he'd limit access to these converged tools to the people who paid to use them. Just let that sink in. So in addition to the responsive mechanisms that we need to focus on, such as the development of more accessible and sophisticated tools to better detect and block and monitor AI-assisted online violence, but not just AI-assisted online violence, the very rudimentary versions that involve repeated threats to rape and dehumanisation in other forms. We need also to act urgently to regulate in ways that prevent the development and distribution of unsafe technologies that are in fact either designed to or used to abuse women and girls. It's not just about the publication of the outputs, it's about the design. So we've reached the tipping point. The escalating threat of online violence represents an attack on women's rights to gender equality, freedom of expression, and democratic participation, as I said. It chills truth-telling, it undercuts facts, and it creates the enabling environment for the rollback of women's rights. It also exposes us to escalating psychological and physical harm. And there's increasing evidence, as I've showed, of a correlation and even a causal relationship between the online threats towards women in public life and the offline attacks. We have to remember that impunity for gendered online violence aids and abets impunity for crimes against women in public life, especially journalists, human rights defenders, political actors, and activists. And in an era of AI-assisted subjugation and even rape of women and girls, legal and regulatory mechanisms, along with political accountability, have become even more urgent. It's also essential that online violence targeting women in public life be mapped to human rights violations and more effectively monitored, recorded, and transparently reported by those responsible for ensuring their safety, including states that are willing, big tech companies, media employers, civil society, and intergovernmental organisations. It's only together, through radical collaboration, as my colleague Maria Ressa suggests, between researchers, investigative journalists, civil society organisations, regulators, and UN agencies, that we can make a difference. We must work together to urgently turn the tide. Thank you very much, and I'd invite my fellow panellists up to the stage to continue the conversation.
Joining Julie Posetti, please welcome Sarah Hendriks, Maria Ressa, and moderator Jennifer Klein.
Thank you so much, I just want to start by saying thank you to you, Julie, for that excellent presentation, but even more importantly, for the critical research that you are doing. And I'm going to take 1 minute to just tell you a little bit more about the other panelists. You now know Julie a bit. We're also joined by Sarah Hendriks, who is the director of the Policy, Program, and Intergovernmental Support Division at UN Women. And since August of 2024, she also serves as head of secretariat for the UN Secretary General's Gender Equality Acceleration Plan. And of course, also Maria Ressa, who is, as I think you all know, a Nobel Peace Prize winning journalist, professor of professional practice, and IGP faculty advisor board member here at Columbia's SIPA. As a journalist in Asia for more than 37 years, Maria co-founded Rappler, which is as the top digital only news site that is leading the fight for press freedom in the Philippines. So Maria, I want to start with you. And I can think of no better person to set the stage. The Institute of Global Politics Women's Initiative released a report this fall commemorating the 30th anniversary of the Beijing conference. And in this report, we flesh out the link between the global resurgence of authoritarianism and the organized transnational effort, speaking of radical collaboration, effort to roll back women's rights. So how is online violence part of the authoritarian playbook and the sort of broader strategy that we see on democratic erosion?
Yeah, I mean, first, I was one of the reporters chasing Hillary Clinton at the Beijing Women's Conference. And it's actually really cool to see what happened then and heartbreaking to see where we are now. Tech-enabled is what I would say, right? The very first thing. There are more women than men here. We need more men also, right? But the other part is that this is tech-enabled. That was the first part. When we went through this with Duterte in the Philippines, I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour. 90, not 19, right? So this is a tactic, and the tech enables it. You've heard that from Julie. I think beyond that also is that one woman cannot respond because then you're doxxed, right? So how do you handle it? That's always been the first step. The first attack in a democracy have been the human rights and then the journalists, the activists, the academics, and then you go on. But now with the kind of tech we have, you can literally go to the cellular level of a democracy. You are targeted, which means you also have to be part of the solution. We're seeing some of this now in Minnesota, for example, right? Like what we called citizen journalism in the Philippines. One of the guys in my class that we just had just pointed out, it used to be citizen journalism in the Philippines. Now they're using videos to show it. So tech is positive and negative, but in general, the negative has just surpassed it. Here's the last thing on this. The impact is personal, it's sociological, we behave differently in groups. And the last part is that when we behave differently in groups, it also has an impact on the way we vote. And let me say that one more time, because we did a report out of Moldova, for example, when you had a woman candidate running for president and the amount of disinformation attacking Maya Sandu was off the scale, right? When the way Facebook, and I'll specifically focus on that because that's where we were attacked the most a decade ago. This is a fight for over a decade, guys. 2016. In Facebook, it was, women were attacked. And again, I think it was Julie's team, before we really even know each other, who pointed out that in 2014, women were attacked 3 times more. By 2017 in the Philippines, it was 10 times more from our data. So they came through. What spreads fastest on Facebook was lies laced with fear, anger, and hate. Women, LGBTQ, if you're marginalized in the physical world, you're further marginalized online. When that happens, it has an impact on your society. Right, the Solomon Asch studies, 75% will follow the group, but there's a 25% that won't. But then the last part of that is, if it changes the way you feel, if you live in toxic sludge, then how are you going to vote, right? And I think the last statistic from last year that I'll throw in is VDEM said 72% of the world is now under authoritarian rule. So directly linked to that, right? 72%, they'll be coming out with their study this year. Now, and the last thing I'll say, which is existential, yesterday we just announced the doomsday clock. I'm such a good morning to you, am I not? I know. No, but I'm saying you have the choice to do something about it. Last year, the doomsday clock stood at 89 seconds to midnight. This year, yesterday, we put it at 85 seconds to midnight. And, that means act now, right? That's what we have to do. Sorry, long-winded way, but, women led the fight in the Philippines. Women were jailed for the fight in the Philippines. So, where do we go?
Yeah, and actually a follow-up for you on that. You said it changes how people vote. Is there evidence that it changes whether people vote, and women in particular, or is that the next piece of work that needs to be done?
Yeah, we don't have statistics down to that level. What we are just seeing, I'm just giving you the studies that were there and then what happened in the Philippines. I know the Philippines really well. We did a 3-year deep dive into data in the United States and the kind of information operations you Americans are targeted with. You're
He's
no
also
longer
American.
exceptional. I know, I will say I'm also American, Filipino-American. But yeah, I will shut up now.
Julie, I want to turn back to you. You just, it's in the report, and you just emphasized this really pretty stunning, many stunning, but this particular stunning statistics that the incidence of online violence that moves offline has more than doubled since 2020, so from 20% to 42%. Focus on that for a second. In not that long. Yeah. So the question for you is, how has and you talked a little bit about this, but tell us more about how the rapid proliferation of generative AI has contributed to the rise of online violence against women in public life, and what are the obvious impacts of that?
Sure. So, the first thing I would say is that statistic that we have that demonstrates this dramatic rise in the online to offline trajectory is focused on women journalists, because that's the data that we had in 2020. But it's so sobering to see that in the first attempt to collect data on women human rights defenders and women activists shows us that their experience at the first point of recording the data is on par with that. Now, in our work, and colleagues, Nabila Shabir and Leah Helmussen and Helmuller and others who can't be here have contributed to this work, and I just want to take this chance to acknowledge them in addition to Kaylee before I fail to do so, which is not the kind of feminist I am. We are in a situation where women journalists we have viewed through our research as proxies for the experience of women journalists, of women in public life more broadly in online spaces. And that's partly because we're talking about groups of women such as human rights defenders, as Maria said, academics, activists, political actors. These are all women, like journalists, who are attempting to speak truth to power, and whose truth is being silenced by authoritarian actors and misogynists, some of whom are both misogynistic and authoritarian in their approach, from across tech into politics. We are seeing the same tactics deployed against women. It is about silencing, curtailing investigations, avoiding accountability. And this goes to the tech companies themselves. We have the real-time case of Elon Musk seeking to avoid any kind of accountability, even when the Prime Minister of a sovereign state makes a public statement that there needs to be action. So we need to, I think, really learn from the work that's been done to document these attacks and the ways in which they move from online to offline, and be incredibly well prepared to deal with an avalanche of additional physical manifestations of online violence in the context of AI-assisted assault. You are seeing the incitement to rape now, going beyond threats to rape to the physical representation of such. Wow. This is so that what we've documented so far is, in terms of that online to offline trajectory for women journalists explicitly, and now we move into the territory of these other groups, is everything from physical stalking to being screamed at in a supermarket, having abuse hurled at you in a supermarket while you do your grocery shopping with reference to online abuse that you've experienced, through to a Northern Ireland investigative reporter, crime reporter, seeing her name next to a hashtag and the sights of a gun on a wall in Belfast after being targeted by paramilitary groups. So these are very real, very physical, very serious situations, which I'm afraid to say are highly likely to be exponentially worse in 3 months' time, in 4 months' time, as a result of the kinds of incitement to sexual violence that we are seeing now.
Thank you. Sarah, we're obviously at a critical moment for international governance and multilateral cooperation. So I wanted to turn to you and ask about your views about the role of the United Nations, including UN Women, to prevent and eliminate online violence against women, and really talk to us about how the UN system as a whole can continue to advance this work, particularly, and I'm going to say it gently, in an evolving global political and funding landscape.
Well done in that description, and thank you, Jen.
And you don't have to be gentle.
And thank you for convening this space. It's such an important one, and it's an honor to be here as part of this critical dialogue. I think you really framed it well in saying that we're at a critical juncture. There's no understatement there for multilateralism, for international cooperation. I think we're seeing within that unprecedented and growing threats against gender equality and women's rights, especially in the normative space, but beyond. We're seeing that coupled with all of the evidence we hear about today on the discrediting of women in public life and the silencing of them, as well as just the complexity of the fiscal environment for multilateralism. All of that combined is creating both an incredibly toxic space, but one that is so far away from that stage 30 years ago where Hillary Clinton proclaimed women's rights are human rights in Beijing. And in fact, as part of UN Women's work for the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, governments from around the world, in fact, it's 1 in 4 of them, so 25% of governments around the world, stated that this pushback against gender equality is one of the most significant inhibitors for them actually implementing that very ambitious, comprehensive platform on women's rights. And so that's a real wake-up call as well. It's been an honor to work together with Julie and the entire team that has pulled this together. And that's one of the ways that the UN system comes to build and engage in partners. This particular work is funded by the EU as part of something called the ACT program to end violence against women that UN Women partners on. But there are other roles that the UN can, should, and is playing. And so allow me just to kind of tick through those very, very quickly. First of all, UN Women has a brand new strategy on what is a mouthful of words, technology-facilitated violence against women and girls. And it, in essence, has 5 core levers. And these are levers which are in progress, but also ones which are aspirational. And the first is all about the normative space and how we advance norms to strengthen accountability on digital violence. And here, this is about putting digital violence against women and girls, particularly in public life, and gender equality at the heart of digital governance. There have been, just in the last couple of years, some really important normative frameworks that have advanced forward. And many of you might know about those. I'll read some of them. There's a new cybercrime convention, a new global digital compact, At the Commission on the Status of Women a few years ago, it was just dedicated to the space of tech and innovation. And so we're seeing slowly but surely in those normative agreements by governments around the world, the positioning of digital violence within that. And so that's a critical lever. Recently, we had the first ever UN General Assembly resolution on violence against women and girls in the digital environment. And that too, I think, is steps forward. But I will say, though those are good words on pages where governments come together to agree, they remain only that unless they are coupled with other efforts. And so our second lever in that strategy is actually about what Julie and team are doing. It is about data, evidence, and knowledge, and how that can be harnessed and pushed forward to drive change. I think this is about spotlighting women's rights issues through the tipping point as an example, but really generating robust, credible evidence and data that positions this issue so that it can't be ignored, so that it has to be looked at head on. One of the things that UN Women does, and maybe it sounds very specific and processual, but it's incredibly important. We work together with the UN Statistical Commission in order to advance the methodological framework on digital violence so that governments all around the world can count and report on this in a consistent way. That has quality, that has comparability across governments, and that can be ensured to give us the data in a world that there's a lot of data paucity in this space. So that's our second lever. Our third lever is all about transforming social norms, acknowledging that everything you heard Julie describe, as horrific and egregious as it is, has as its basis the allowance of that by the unspoken norms that exist and persist in and across societies. And so as core to this, we see that norm change in public and private spaces as a very critical lever, but one which I'll say is very, very hard to shift. And we all know that. I think here we've seen that the engagement of men and boys, that the role of men and boys to better understand their online behaviors, as well as leverage their voice and role online, is a component of change. UN Women is partnering with an organization called Equimundo. It might be familiar to some of you, to look at evidence on what's called the manosphere, and to look at the perpetration of and perpetuation of tech-facilitated violence online from that lens of masculinities and the role of men to change that. And I'll be quick just to say the fourth and final lever, the fifth one. The fourth one is all about prevention and the investment that's needed into prevention. I think UN Women and together with the UN system, we try to advance the right standards so that investment by governments around the world can go to standards that will really make a difference in prevention of violence. One of the ways we do this is working with law enforcement institutions in many countries. We have a network of policing institutions and a whole program on gender responsive policing. And we work to bring together kind of the operationalization of what is gender responsive policing and how is that connected to the judicial structures, as well as more broadly to the justice structures to responding to this issue. And finally, the fifth lever is all about women's leadership, their own agency, their own resilience, their own voice in making a difference. I mean, what Julie was describing should cause us all to pause and be very cognizant of the impact on women's voices and the way in which impacts women to deplatform, to step back. And there's such an important role for both public and private actors to change that once and for all.
Thank you. Julie, turning back to you, we've done research here at the Institute of Global Politics that shows that countries, the EU, the United States, the UK, Australia, have passed national laws that address online violence against women. So talk a bit about the strengths and weaknesses of those laws and what, by the way, the private sector can and should be doing in the absence of laws.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is that if only big tech companies could be trusted to self-regulate effectively, and if only political actors did not themselves become perpetrators of gender-based online violence and other acts of violence against women in public life, then we wouldn't need to be fighting constantly for more effective regulatory and other forms of law enforcement related response. And to your point about normative change, yes, it's absolutely essential. I mean, it's not that the oligarchy invented violence against women, right? It's that they are inflaming it, facilitating it, and using it to roll back our rights. I mean, this is strategic, it's deliberate, in concert with their efforts to suppress our informed, research-oriented, investigative-based work, that is designed to hold them to account. So it's a struggle. It's a serious struggle. And one of the biggest reasons that it's a struggle, because we have so much evidence now to support effective regulation. We hopefully have consensus, at least within Europe and Australia and other liberal democratic societies, looking at Brazil as a space, as a country, where they have very effectively attempted to hold very big power to account. But we have the evidence to enable that kind of effective regulation. What we don't have is the political will to do so. And we're in a geopolitical environment, using all the sensitive language, which makes it extremely difficult to exact the kind of regulatory responses, including the punitive actions that are essential, on companies that, for the most part, are based in this country and have now been bound up with geopolitical strategy, which unfortunately runs counter to accountability for these companies. So this is incredibly gnarly as problems go. That said, I say this with a degree of kind of consternation. It seems to me that we are now in a new moment, a new inflection point, if you like, where good men in power, I say men deliberately, are seeing in a paternalistic way, to an extent, this nudification trend, this simulated rape trend, as a bridge too far. It's caused them to be protective, and as problematic as that is, I'll take it. Which has really started to shift the needle. If I look at the country I live in, the UK, and I look at my country of birth, Australia, we can see those levers being pulled more effectively. And in the case of the UK and Grok, for example, what followed the Prime Minister and Ofcom, the regulators standing up to them, was that the European Union followed with similar investigative action. They must follow through with the kind of punitive action that is demanded by the regulation that does exist. And we must move beyond a kind of position of comfortable retreat to the very important work of defending the rights of children online and protecting them from predatory behaviour, and to ensure that gender-based hate speech, misogynistic hate speech, and other acts of violence against women, particularly women in public life, is enacted. Because to your point about whether this is affecting democratic participation, our next report for UN Women, we're still doing the data analysis, but will show an utterly alarming trend in the escalation of women's self-censoring. Again, with comparison to our 2020 data, which we're just looking at now. Self-censorship is accompanied by a lack of agency, and that obviously has implications for participation in electoral processes, right? So, so far, there has been too little, too late, too ineffective action, and kind of, international bullying of states that do attempt to regulate effectively. And this is the moment, I sincerely hope, whether it's coming from a paternalistic reflex or not, we will see real action.
And I'm a lawyer by training, so I'll add one more to what that was a really important list. Something that we managed to do in the Biden-Harris administration when the Violence Against Women Act was reauthorized, which was add a private right of action for technology-facilitated gender-based violence. And we're seeing in real time right now that not enough, but that is another tool.
And the Take It Down Act in the US is a thing. We should acknowledge that.
Yes.
That has at least happened.
It is
so
a
let's
thing.
see.
Yes, exactly. Okay, we have a few more minutes. I just wanted to end with, for each of you, a question about action. So what action can we take across sectors, whether that's civil society, academia, journalism, tech, policy, law, to really end this scourge once and for all? And I would love to start with you, and you could elaborate on that notion of radical collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen the stats, and this is for women, right? But we're going beyond this. And I will echo Julie in saying, we have to regulate tech. We have to demand better. The impunity that we are living through is enabled by tech. And I'll go back, Camille Francois and I began working on this. We're patriotic trolling, like a long time back, 2017. And now she's working on something called Roost, which literally is trust and safety, a floor for trust and safety that does include women. And yet, she'll be the first to say, or maybe she won't. Let me say it. I actually, this is an illusion. So you are in danger, man or woman, women more than men, right? 2026 is a tipping point year. So what do we have to do for radical collaboration? We need to get up and move, right? We can't stop with this. Right now, the impunity is not just tech. Tech enables it. There's a fusion of US power, state power, with oligarchy power. And that can be lethal, not just to women, but to agency, to democracy, to the world we live in, because if we don't have a shared reality, we can't agree. Climate change, for example, is even an issue, right? The UN was told it is, what was it? A hoax, right? So this is not a hoax. This is real. Thank you for the 5 men in the room. We love you.
She counted.
I did count. But radical collaboration means journalists, civil society. If you are online, on social media, this is the most predatory and extractive industry globally that is acting with impunity. We need to move. We need to move. We have the research. It's been a decade of research. Let's act.
Thanks. I want to build from the point around this isn't just a threat against women, but it is actually a threat to democracy itself. And we need to lean in there and also shape this, understanding its multifaceted threats. And this really is about also threat to democratic principles, the undermining of democracy because of the way that digital violence silences women, the way it discredits women, the way it leads to women deplatforming and stepping back from public life, the way in which women self-censor. Julie did a bit of a call out for the next research piece that's coming out, and so, keep your eyes on this space for additional data on that. And when that happens, that withdrawal of women from public life actually becomes part of the undermining of democracy itself, because it makes our whole systems and societies more risky, less free, less tolerant, and where we see hate speech become normalized across online and offline platforms. I think in addition to ensuring that we understand those threats and that we're framing them effectively, Julie pointed to the imperative of laws and policies. I want to echo that. I think we need to see those ubiquitously across the world. And we need to see laws and policies that are framing this also as a human rights violation, framing it for what it is, and framing it in a way that shapes this as real violence. Somehow in the discourse, this often can be just seen as fake violence. when in fact it is very, very real. And at the risk of my voice going, I will say, somewhat temporally, I'll ask you to say it.
Yeah. Sure. I got voice. I will give her voice. We need to stand in solidarity and strengthen partnerships with feminist movements and civil society to ensure that those most affected are helping to shape solutions. Do not lose your power.
Thank you.
What a beautiful demonstration of
That's
solidarity.
solidarity in action.
It was literally. Julie, do you have...
Exactly.
Radical
It's
collaboration.
in the moment. Look, I think some of the other work we are doing, I would just like to point to, because I think practically it's useful. And that goes to the point around mapping online violence episodes against human rights violations. So we published with the OSCE at the end of 2023, actually, guidelines for monitoring the escalation of online violence to offline harm. And we identified 16 indicators for escalation. Which I think I would just commend the work of my team on this, but also to direct you to it. It's a free resource which provides guidance, and that can be, it's specifically for women journalists, but it can be very easily and effectively deployed for women in public life more broadly. And as part of that work comes from ongoing work which was funded by the UK Foreign Office, designed to enhance and to use AI technologies to assist with this, to enhance to as real time as possible the monitoring of episodes of online violence. And so this points to the need for increased and improved engagement with those processes within news organisations, within civil society organisations, among legal practitioners taking cases, and our data, which will be released in the next report, indicates also an increase in the number of referrals to law enforcement for these cases. So it's vitally important that we are equipping law enforcement and judicial actors to accept that this is real violence, that it's not virtual, because that is very much the angle that's being pursued by those who would seek to frame this as a speech issue if we are trying to insist on our rights online, as the UN says we must, then we come up against these sorts of arguments. So I think that increased monitoring, increased training sounds boring, but it is essential, increased training of those key responders alongside this vital public conversation around an incredibly gnarly but important issue, and the advocacy that goes with that, to trigger the action, from small actions of monitoring to actions of brave insistence on accountability.
Thank you. That's a beautiful place to end. I think we have time for one or two questions.
Hi. My name is Kaylee Williams. I'm a PhD student here at Columbia. Julie, I think, started to get to this, but I wondered if you all might just address a very common critique that we see in the United States as it relates to any real proposal about regulation of tech, but also regulation that helps to seek women find justice in issues related to these that we're talking about today, and that is the freedom of speech issue. If we regulate tech, if we regulate speech online, we will the First Amendment falls apart. I would love if this argument is made by Elon Musk and many others, and so I wonder if we could just sort of speak to that and address that a bit.
And I see there are two other questions, so not to increase the pressure here, but if we could answer quickly, then we can get to these other two.
Oh, you want us to answer?
Anybody who wants to.
Do you want to go next, Maria?
Do you mind?
Yeah, no, go,
So
please.
it's a safety issue. It's not a speech issue. And the first person who actually said that was a comedian. So big tech lobby has gone very far at the EU during the time of the DSA, 150 million euros a year, and that was 3 years ago. 3 years ago, here in the United States, $70 million a year. Big tech is now the largest lobby. So don't fall for it. Don't fall for this is a speech issue. This is a safety issue, not just for women, but for all of us. And then the second one of like, this is by design, folks, for money, for more profit. We can demand better, right?
Hi, my name is Josefina. I'm an MPA here at SIPA.
From Chile.
And I wanted to ask about transparency and highlighting these acts of violence, internet violence. Both Maria and Julie have had extensive work not only documenting these threats, but also exposing them. And I've seen even in internet personalities who actually responding to trolls, etc., try to highlight them and put them in their videos, exposing these characters. And I wanted to ask for some sort of comment in this level of individual responses. How is it it actually useful, or is it just putting a Band-Aid on the problem?
You want me to take that? So I mean, counter speech. This is referred to. I think is important. However, I have witnessed some of the women whose experiences I've studied in a collaborative way. So we use a method called participatory action research, which means we try to give agency to the people we are studying, which has its roots in kind of feminist thought. I have seen with my own eyes and through my own exposure to the online violence that followed an escalation of attacks on women who practice counter-speech. I say that just as awareness raising, not because I want to suggest that staying silent is ever the best option. Some women will choose that option for self-preservation, and I think we have to respect that. But as Maria sitting here will tell you, I mean, back a decade ago, we had a conversation that she's written about in her book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, which is ever more relevant, which involved her feeling reluctant about speaking up and speaking back.
She had to convince me to talk.
And then she went on to win a flipping Nobel Peace Prize in part for
So
doing
awesome.
that. But you know, it's a tactic. I always want to encourage women to use their agency to speak truth to power and to speak back to abusers. And we've seen some incredible bravery. You know, if you take, it's not an online violence case, but Gisèle Picot, for example, in France, using her voice, waiving her right to anonymity to speak very powerfully
She was
to abuse.
clobbered online.
Yes, she was.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, Maria, go.
No, can I quickly, in the age of exponential lies, name and shame doesn't work, sadly. But what we did find worked in Rappler was we organized ourselves online. So if my reporter was being attacked, she doesn't say anything, the rest of us come through, right? I mean, other countries have done something similar, but there is a toll on you personally. So you want to be aware of that, but it's also really fun to just look at it as data.
Yeah.
If I can just add, one of the things that we've been working together with the E-Safety Commissioner of Australia on is how to support and build capacity of women in public life who are experiencing digital violence, to also just capacitate their own ability to be resilient, to understand mechanisms for other support, and to have broader basis for connecting with others to create the condition of the collective. Because it's such a isolating and terrifying experience that accelerates and becomes compounding to the broader experience of mis and disinformation, of hate speech, of gender-based violence that those women in public life are facing on an everyday basis. And so while you hear the word by design, in terms of the tech industry, there's also creating safety by design for and behalf of women themselves.
That's true, but can I just add one very quick point, which is that I think resilience is a word that is used with effect, but I also think we need to be a bit cautious about deploying resilience, because there is a risk that not just big tech, but the governments that should be regulating outsource the risk management to those who are
To the users.
Exactly, to those who are both the primary targets who then become the first responders. And we can develop skills in terms of resilience. We can do exactly the sort of cooperative, swarming that Maria was talking about. But we should never accept the outsourcing of the management of this crisis to the targets.
Okay, last question.
Hi, thank you. My name is Evie Larson. I am a first-year MIA student at SEPA, concentrating in international security and diplomacy, and I had the honor of hearing you speak, Maria, earlier in my Inside the Situation Room class with Secretary Clinton. And actually, prior to your lecture, one of the lectures, I sat with some of my male colleagues, and they were disagreeing with some of the points she was making about a security issue, but they decided to speak about the clothes she was wearing, talk about her age, which, we've all experienced. Sexism is alive and well. But I think my question for you guys is how, even here at SEPA, we can address these things more on the front end and pull for our male colleagues and allies, as opposed to just, and not that it's a just, but working with regulations on the back end. How can we create this culture of having an awareness of these issues and how they're even affecting us here in the classroom?
Maria, do you want to take that one?
Oh my gosh, that's.
How much time do you have?
Yeah. Look, I mean, there's so many people in SEPA that are working on this now, and actually the Women's Initiative is front and center. Roost is front and center. In your circle of influence, call it out. And you don't have to call it out as in aggressively so. It's with empathy. Right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now I'm a Filipino in Philippines' largest Roman Catholic nation in Asia. It's a simple thing, the golden rule, right? It's a good thing to practice. So I think right up front, when you see it, call it and do it you don't have to be aggressive about it. This is what we've fought for. But sadly, what I think has been happening, tech facilitated, is that everything we won in Beijing has been pushed back generations. I hope not. I worry about the next generation, right? But beyond gender norms, I worry about their search for meaning, right? Anyway, I will shut up now. Thank you.
We can continue this
Yeah,
conversation.
so much more.
But I want to, unfortunately, we do have to end, and I want to just thank these incredible panelists and Julie in particular for this work. So thank you for joining us at SEPA, and we're looking forward to the next one already.
Thanks for having us.